Lancia kind of has a monopoly on positive superlatives in rallying. So they have the most important rally car, the first rally car ever designed for rallying only, that being the Stratos. Then they have the last great rear-wheel drive car, the 037. They have the last great front-wheel drive car, the Fulvia. And they have the most successful rally car of all time, the Delta. The 1970s saw an explosion of family hatchbacks in Europe, and Lancia didn't have anything. The closest they had was the front-wheel drive Fulvia Coupe, but that was discontinued in 1973. So, they developed Project Y5, that was released as the new 1979 Delta. And it was very much a Fiat parts bin special. Built with independent suspension from the Beta, a partnership with Saab gave them rust-proofing, among many other smaller things, and an engine list from the Fiat Ritmo. Lancia tweaked the Fiat 4-cylinders to make 84 horsepower, but it's still not exactly a performance car, which is fine, okay? We'll get to that later. It's fine. It wasn't supposed to be. It was supposed to be a moderate, family-sized hatchback, and it was styled appropriately. No fancy curves, just a proportional 70s box like the Volkswagen Golf, which is no coincidence since Giorgetto Giugiaro of Ital Design penned both of them within 5 years of each other. And like the Golf, it was a smash hit, earning European Car of the Year and selling 100,000 units by its first refresh in 1982. That's really good for an upmarket hatchback in a very competitive market. That 1982 refresh cleaned up the styling a bit, removed some weight, and gave the car an optional digital trip computer. It also unveiled the first performance trim, the GT 1600. It was given the much larger 1.6-liter engine, making 100 horsepower, and featured sportier suspension, disc brakes, and low-profile tires. It's a fine and often overlooked hatchback, but it was no Golf GTI and it sort of came and went. But Lancia didn't care. They were selling 100,000 Deltas per year by this point. However, they didn't like half measures, and the GT 1600, while a fine hot hatch, was a half measure. So they made a proper performance model a year later, and you can tell it was a genuine effort since they called it the HF Turbo, or High Fidelity, which is the same moniker they used on the Stratos. It was now a turbocharged rocket with 128 horsepower, a ZF 5-speed manual, Recaro seats, and bigger tires. That's 18 horsepower more than the GTI, while weighing about the same. It was a proper hot hatch that could go toe-to-toe with the best of them. The Delta got another facelift in 1986, and the biggest change of all in this refresh was a new trim level option called the HF 4-wheel drive that was launched in April 1986. We'll come back to that date specifically later on. Now, the 4-wheel drive system was taken straight from their WRC program that I assure you I haven't forgotten about. And doing this kept costs low since they used the sunk cost in the rally program to make the drivetrain. And it was the world's first 4-wheel drive hot hatch that set the recipe for all future super hot hatches. A turbocharged 4-cylinder up front, powering all 4 wheels. The Ford Focus RS, Mercedes A45 AMG, Volkswagen Golf R, everyone barring Honda and Mini uses this formula to a T. The HF 4-wheel drive is a legendary car, not just because of its historic significance, but because of its performance as well. It was a 1986 hatchback with 4-wheel drive, power-assisted steering, vented front brakes, and 163 horsepower. It could do 0 to 60 in under 7 seconds, which is faster than a modern Fiesta ST. But it has nothing on its big brother S4. The Delta S4 was Lancia's 4-wheel drive response to WRC Group B rallying. By 1985, Group B and its no rules rulebook had gone completely off the rails. Ford was developing a new mid-engine supercar, Audi was breaching 600 horsepower, and Peugeot was using a mid-engine 205 hatchback with a Formula 1 turbo stuck on. Lancia's rear-wheel drive 037, while brilliant, was outclassed in every single way. The S4 was not outclassed, that is for sure. It was a full-blown silhouette race car with an aluminum tube frame and a body shell made out of carbon fiber composite. The whole thing weighed just 1,900 pounds, and that bodywork was fully aero-kitted out with a massive front splitter, a deck-lid rear wing, and a gurney flap. But the most impressive thing was found underneath its carbon fiber clamshell: the engine. It was a 1.8-liter four-cylinder, but in order to streamline the power curve, Lancia fitted a turbocharger to their existing supercharger system. The world's first twin-charged engine had supercharger pressure at low RPMs for better acceleration, and turbo pressure at higher RPMs for more power. And oh, there was a lot of it. Officially, the car made 500 horsepower, with 550 available if things were looking bad that day. But behind closed doors during testing, Lancia pushed their four-cylinder monster to the max just to see what it could take. And it recorded 73 psi of boost pressure, generating 1,000 horsepower. So in 1985, this mid-engine hatchback made 556 horsepower per liter. The only non-electrified engine that was better ever before or since is the BMW M12 F1 engine with an estimated 933 horsepower per liter. The S4 did 0 to 60 in 2.7 seconds anywhere, with some sources saying that dropped to just 2.3 seconds on tarmac, which puts it toe-to-toe with modern-day hypercars. And per WRC rules, they built 200 Stradale road versions for the public. These were also twin-charged space frame weapons, but you could actually drive them without immense fear, since it only made 250 horsepower, or as much as the top-of-the-line Ferrari 308. Interestingly enough, though, that Ferrari is actually cheaper to get, since an S4 Stradale can now set you back over $1 million. The S4 went on its debut at the 1985 RAC Rally and embarked on an epic fight against Peugeot in 1986. Lancia won 4 events, however the death of Henry Toivonen in a fiery crash led to Peugeot taking the crown and the FIA taking action. Toivonen's crash was just one of several horrific accidents in the last few years, and it was the final straw. Group B was banned and Group A touring car rules were applied to rallying in 1987. But what if I were to tell you that the S4 wasn't the ultimate Delta? It was the ultimate Delta to race, but Lancia had developed 2 prototypes for the upcoming 1987 Group S regulations that were even more game-changing. The Experimental Composite Vehicle, or ECV, was built in preparation for the soon-to-be-announced Group S rules, and it may look like a modified S4, but it was a full redesign. Almost everything was carbon fiber, including the bodywork and the rims, which only weighed 12 pounds each. The chassis was also partially carbon fiber, and it became the first rally car designed on a computer, which allowed them to optimize the dimensions to focus on areas of high stress using FEA analysis. Then there was the engine. Twin charging was a little too complicated and unreliable, but a twin turbo setup could still get 600 horsepower while being a lot simpler. The ECV was a brilliant machine that was actually way overbuilt, since the new Group S rules ended up limiting horsepower to just 300, and in the end it wasn't even necessary as Group S was banned along with B in 1986. But that didn't stop Lancia from making the ECV2 in 1988, for some reason. If the ECV1's era was crazy, the 2 wasn't even from this planet. It looked more like a GT car than a WRC racer, but it also, served no point other than destroying the ECV1 since it used that car's chassis as the foundation for its new design. But ECV1 was reborn in 2011 with the help of a donor S4 and a Fiat-sourced original engine. The original designers also joined the project, and it's still seen at car shows and occasional historic rally events today. But we're way ahead of schedule. The demise of Group B left everyone with all these bona fide supercars that couldn't compete. Audi, Peugeot, Ford, Toyota, Seat, Opel, they had all poured countless amounts of money on these upcoming programs, and you know what? They all ended up useless, which led to them using second-hand cars. I mean, Ford was so desperate they turned to a rear-wheel drive Sierra Cosworth half a decade after the Audi Quattro made it irrelevant. But here's the stroke of luck that gave Lancia its perfect car. Remember how I said the HF four-wheel drive launched in April 1986? Well, that was just a month or two before the Group B ban was announced, which meant while everyone else was struggling to find a car to fit, Lancia had a four-wheel drive, turbocharged hatchback with a well-established racing legacy just ready to go for the upcoming Group A regulations. As a result, the HF four-wheel drive went up against Sierra Cosworths, Mitsubishi Starions, and BMW M3s, all of which were rear-wheel drive. Subaru and Mazda were the only other manufacturers with a full four-wheel drive lineup, and they weren't exactly the fastest. Lancia won every single event they entered bar 2, and took the title with a 38-point margin while finishing 1, 2, 3 in the driver's standings. And the Delta wasn't even fully optimized for rallying. They just took a road car, put a roll cage in it, and said good enough. That was the 1987 Delta. And when the Delta 8-valve was finalized in 1988, nothing could even see its taillights. Out of the 12 rallies entered in 1988, they won 10 of them, including 3 podium lockouts. But a new challenger was arriving that would be a bit of foreshadowing for later on, the Toyota Celica GT4. So Lancia simply followed Porsche's idea and tweaked the Delta each year to maintain a competitive edge. No need to spend more money and give away your hand too early when you can dribble in advancements year over year. First up was the Integrale 16-valve. It had 4 valves per cylinder as opposed to the old 8-valve design, which explains the new bulging hood. It also featured a retuned turbo, a more efficient intercooler, and bigger fuel injectors to make 200 horsepower on the road. There is one thing it kept, though, that was the same. Its engine balance shafts. Since the engine from the Delta four-wheel drive was from a luxury car, it had balanced shafts like a luxury car. And that actually made it one of the most boring-sounding hot hatch engines of all time, but it also gave the engine perfectly smooth delivery regardless of where or how it was driven. So when paired with the four-wheel drive system, it had a 0 to 60 in just 5.7 seconds. It did have an understeer problem. It was an 80s four-wheel drive car after all, but they did minimize it a bit by giving the differential a rear bias. That four-wheel drive system, though, was so good in racing that after 1989, they would never have to redesign it. That meant the Delta destroyed everyone again, since Toyota was still dealing with reliability problems. Lancia beat their previous best record in 1989 by scoring 4 podium lockouts and winning by another 39 points. And once again, Lancia just did some very minor improvements, a little bit of tweaking, a little bit of tuning, and called it good for 1990. You know who did more than that? Toyota. Their Celica ST165 was a reliable powerhouse now, and Lancia actually had a fight on their hands. Luckily, they stole Juha Kankkunen away from Toyota, so they only had to fight Carlos Sainz. But he was really good in that Toyota, and won 3 rallies with another 4 podiums. Lancia won 6 rallies, but they were split amongst their drivers, and Sainz ultimately took the title with 2 rounds to spare, while Lancia dodged a bullet and scored 3rd at Rally GB to secure their 9th Constructors' title by 6 points. In doing that, they broke their own record from the Stratos for most consecutive championships in a row by winning 4 in a row. But it also gave Lancia the wake-up call they needed, and the WRC entered a full-blown war. Both teams followed a blank check philosophy, and both cars were breaking that 300 horsepower rule so consistently that some think they were nearing 400 horsepower. It may have been cheating, but I'll tell you what, it led to some damn good racing. Kankkunen and Sainz went head-to-head properly in 1991, as the two of them scored 10 victories, 5 apiece. But critically, Sainz had 2 retirements, and that allowed Kankkunen to take the title. As the Constructors' title, it started out as anybody's game. with the two teams separated by just 6 points at the halfway mark. But then Lancia decimated the second half by winning 4 in a row to take the crown. And being the first manufacturer to score 10 titles, Lancia handed off their rally program to the privateer teams. But they had handed off a pretty great program because they had just unveiled their newest machine, one that pushed the 1979 design to its very limits. The HF Integrale Evolution was nicknamed the SuperDelta for a reason. The engine was given a retune and a new exhaust to make 207 horsepower and 220 torque. And in order to make it fit better, they rotated the engine 180 degrees and then slanted it at an 18-degree angle. But remember, this was a 13-year-old design, so the chassis was strengthened, and so was the steering rack, and the suspension. And the brakes were bigger, with a new servo for good measure. Then there was the bodywork, which was topped off with a fully functional and adjustable rear wing mounted on the roof. And it wasn't just the wing or the hood that was bigger. The fenders were flared by 2 inches to make way for a wider track width, which made the Evo over 5 inches wider than the original 79 Delta, which made it more composed in the corners. This was peak Delta, peak Lancia. The car was at 110%. They could not make a better rally car without going to a new platform. Meanwhile, Toyota and their new Celica ST185 was just getting better. And yet, it was still fighting the SuperDelta, which meant Lancia wiped the floor with Toyota, winning 8 events to their 2. But here's the thing. Similarly to 1990, 3 of Lancia's drivers won rallies, which meant Sainz, despite winning only 2, was still a championship rival. And that meant Sainz, Kankinen, and his teammates Didier Oyel were within 3 points of each other in the final round in Britain. And it was Sainz that got lucky in the UK this time, as Ariel broke down and Kankinen decided he didn't want to drive on the road anymore, securing his 2nd championship. And after 1992, any factory support ceased altogether, and no development took place because there was nothing left to develop apart from more horsepower. But that wasn't a factor in the rallying scene because Lancia and Toyota left the horsepower rules far behind. So Toyota took the manufacturer's title in 1993, the first time someone other than Lancia won a Group A title. But the first-gen Delta was due to be replaced in 1994, so Lancia gave it a proper send-off. Remember how I said that you couldn't develop the Delta any farther than the Evo without giving it more power? Lancia gave it more power. The Evo 2 had a new engine control system and a new water-cooled turbo to make 217 horsepower and 232 torque. It was one of the fastest road-going Lancias ever made, and it's easily the most sought-after Delta apart from the S4. Small wonder that it goes for anywhere from $100,000 to over $300,000, depending on the edition. All in all, the Delta retired with 4 drivers' titles and 6 constructors' titles across 46 rally wins, technically 51 if you include the S4, but 46 is a tie with the Subaru Impreza for the most rally wins in history by a single car. But what's more impressive is the Delta's hit rate. Subaru had to enter 220 rallies to score 46 wins, or a win ratio of 21%. Compare that to Lancia's 53%, which is probably why Lancia as a whole has more championships than anyone else by a large margin, while only being 4th for rally wins. This would have been a beautiful bookend to a beautiful company, but no. Despite everything, Lancia and the Delta soldiered on. Now based off the Fiat Tipo, the 2nd gen was much rounder and featured none of its rallying pedigree. It had 140 horsepower at best, and front-wheel drive only. To be fair, the HF 2.0 was a legitimate hot hatch, and kind of a blend between the Evo and the old GT 1600. So it had the front-wheel drive basic engine, but it was then paired to bigger brakes, flared fenders, an aero kit, and electronically adjustable dampers, so it's not bad. I can't really criticize it all that much. But it was not destined to have the 15-year life of the first generation. It was killed off in 1999 after 139,000 were sold. But it came back in 2006 as part of the FCA rearrangement, and it was even less rally-focused. It looked awful, and in some places it was badged as a Chrysler. It was garbage, plain and simple, and by its discontinuation in 2014, Lancia was only selling one car in one country, the Ypsilon in Italy. Turns out the Italians rather liked it, though, since it was the second best-selling car in the country in 2019, and now Fiat has reorganized again after purchasing PSA in 2019 to form Stellantis. And Stellantis has some big plans. They are launching a massive EV-focused global comeback for Lancia. And one of those EVs is the Delta. Some will be furious that the greatest rally car ever built will go electric, but I can't be happier, because it means we'll get new Lancias after decades of being a joke. And besides, the engine was always the boring part of the Delta. It was simply too smooth and luxurious for a wild superhot hatch. Rather, its motorsport prowess and the feeling behind the wheel is what made the Delta a timeless legend. So we'll have to wait and see.